Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks, and today we've got a Xenagos God of Revels deck sent to us by Eric. Eric has sent us this with the form that you can find in the YouTube video description, and they have said that when I asked what needs improvement, they said balancing types of effects. They have extra combats, doubling power / doubling damage, cheap or free removal, reach or closing power in the late game. They would like to balance all these effects. They say their pod is medium to high power, and the most important aspect of the deck is speed and resilience to interaction. But any and all areas that you see that can use improvement, I am open to changing. I asked about their restrictions, and they said no restrictions, but I generally avoid non-land tutors. However, if you think one or more tutors would substantially improve the deck, I'd love to hear it. Spoilers, one or more tutors would substantially improve the deck, but we'll get there when we get there. As always, I heavily recommend to open the deck list yourself if you're watching this. The deck list is in the YouTube video description below. And open it up, follow along, take a look, see what you would change, see if you agree with me on what we would change. And if you have suggestions, please go ahead and put them in the comments below. That way we can help improve this deck even further. So first things first, what is Xenagos and what does this deck do? Xenagos is a Berserk style effect in your command zone. Xenagos says at combat, you're going to double the power of toughness of a creature you control and give it haste. And Xenagos is a god, so it has a Theros god, so it has the effect that it's not a creature without enough devotion. But that's not really the important part. The important part is that we're going to double the power of our creatures, give one of them haste. You double one, you give one haste, all one creature, and then you attack once and make a big splash. So what kind of splash are we hoping to make here? Well, if we look at cards like Malignus and Phyrexian Hydra, we see two creatures for 5 mana that once they attack once, and if they are not blocked, they are lethal. Phyrexian Hydra has Infect and becomes a 14/14, therefore is very, very strong and one-shots an opponent. Malignus is half the highest life total, so doubled is lethal by design. So once again, a lethal creature. Oops, I am sliding about. Malignus. Then we have Port Razor style effects where multiple attacks will trigger Xenagos multiple times. So Port Razor, who attacks each of your opponents, goes on first attack to an 8/8, second attack to a 16/16, third attack to a 32/32, which is a lot of damage. Now, how do we get there? We have a bunch of ramp. We have a little bit of control of the board with 2 board clears, and we have a bunch of interaction and fling effects to ensure that we get what we want out of the interaction. Now, the next thing we're going to do immediately is we're going to look at the mana curve. And you can see here, we have kind of an interesting mana curve with 5 being particularly high. Now, this mana curve makes sense to me, and I hope it makes sense to you as well, because this is a deck that heavily relies on its 5 mana cards. It wants to play a number of 5 mana creatures that immediately wins the game. So it makes sense that we have a bit of a bump here. But this mana curve, and the reason we always look at it, it's instructive to where the weak point of the deck is. Even in dedicated ramp decks, I don't like the curve to be wonky. The curve is good for a reason. Your curve allows you that if things aren't going your way, you at least have a sense of what are the mana values you're going to draw, and you have a natural inclination to build towards a few strong cards and still have many smaller cards you can play in one turn. So I want to attack that. The first thing I want to look at here is I want to look at our creature base. If you look at this yourself, you'll notice that all of our creatures that are 4 and below are support creatures. They either ramp, provide a doubler, provide card draw of some kind, and everything past that is our damage dealers and our game winners. Very, very briefly, I'd like to add that our utility creatures are fine, but I wouldn't mind, a little more variety. Like Ewit can easily just come into here and be great for the deck. I'm trying to think of a 2 mana enablers, and there really isn't much. The deck is kind of weak on the 2 mana, and there's not a really good solution to that. Archaeomancer feels particularly weak here because though the amount it ramps feels really cool, like it's like a reverse Thalia, right? Every time you cast a green or red spell, you're like, oh, Goblin Archaeomancer did something. So that's another check mark beside it. However, is that any different from Llanowar Elves? Like Llanowar Elves does the same thing. Uh, Archaeomancer is really good in Storm or decks where you're casting multiple spells a turn. And here, I don't really see that. You're playing like one creature a turn, and for your instance, you're kind of holding them up for the right moment, right? So I don't really see Archaeomancer being particularly good here, and I wouldn't mind cutting it. But the theme here is generally 4 mana blows utility. Now let's get into the 5 mana and above, where we see these are our damage dealers, these are our game winners. And I'm going to go real quick and be a little picky on some of them because most of them represent the fact that you're going to win the game or get incredibly far ahead. Portraiser, Terror of the Peaks, Bloodthirster are one-hit wins with Malignus and Phyrexian Hydra. Ilarg, which represents two creatures, like a lot of these are really, really strong. So I'm going to be picky on the ones that are less strong. And with that, we can kind of reduce our curve and spend more time on the ones we want and less time on any one we can get. So the first one I'm going to point out is Elder Gargaroth. Elder Gargaroth feels particularly weak. Now, a 6/6 that turns into a 12/12 Vigilance Trample Reach is a particularly good stat line and effects. The fact that when it attacks, you get either a card or a 3/3, also particularly strong. I guess it does that on block too, but no one's really attacking into you when you have this out. But let's think about that in the context of the deck here, right? Is that really what you want? A 12/12 trample? Not really when the majority of the deck represents either lethal or far more damage than that. Hydra Omnivore is particularly scary because it represents how this 32 plus 16, 48 damage on one single attack. That's the kind of power level we're talking about. We're looking at something like Galta swinging for 24 damage. That's the power level we're talking about. And if you count Malignus and Phyrexian Hydra as swinging in for quote unquote infinity because they automatically defeat an opponent when they hit, Elder Gargaroth starts looking a little weak. Even if we double it again, where we're using a card that says, for example, our God Eternal Ronas, it turns into a 12, then 24. That's a lot of work. That's two creatures you have in play, and I would just rather any other creature here, honestly. I would just rather Portraiser 100% of the time because it represents so much more damage, even though it's weaker. I would rather the Boar, Ilharg, because it represents even more damage by putting another creature into play, attacking immediately. So I don't love Elder Gargaroth. I recognize the fact that it just draws you a card most of the time when it attacks just feels particularly weak, so I'd rather just toss that out. The next one I want to think about is Etali. Etali sticks out here as being, once again, it just becomes a 12. It doesn't have evasion in any way. And it just sticks out as being a very floor to ceiling card. And by that I mean we have to evaluate Etali's floor to ceiling to see how good it is. Now, I think a lot of people are familiar with Etali's ability, so the floor to ceiling test is really easy. Obviously, if you flip 4 lands, you're having a bad time. And if you flip 4 of everyone's best cards, you're having a great time. But I want to really quickly add in to remember that the more powerful your playgroup becomes, the worse Etali itself becomes, because there's just a higher chance of whiffing. So think about the cards that Etali just cannot use, being lands, counterspells, then board clears are particularly bad with it, then hyper-specific combo cards are bad with it, and then very specific removal spells that take out, instead of Beast Within, they take out like only artifacts or enchantments. Hate cards like that as well that hate your own deck. All of those are just off the table. And that's a pretty large group of types of cards that only increase the more competitive your play group becomes. So Itali, I would say, is mid generally. So I don't like Itali, but I'm not going to fight anyone on it because it is a very splashy and fun card. I just don't think this is exactly where this deck wants to be. It is really cool when you play it and you get ahead, but other times you're going to play it attacking to someone, they're going to destroy it after attacks, and it's just you're just going to be a little disappointed, I would say. Coming back down, we have the next one I want to think about is Artaka and Balefire Dragon. Artaka itself, she's interesting because she doesn't hit for 12, right? She hits for 24, and that's a much more respectable amount of damage, but it's still a little low. She still represents 2 attacks, and I think a creature that all it does is deal like direct damage to an opponent is less attractive at that mana cost when it doesn't immediately kill that opponent. So once again, going back to our key players of Phyrexian Hydra and Malignus, immediately, sorry, I just thought that we should, isn't there one more haste? Infect, haste. Yeah, Putrefax. Why is Putrefax not in here? Let's come back to Putrefax. I think Artaka, if you consider her to be just a damage creature, much like Putrefax, which I will reference soon, I don't know. I particularly prefer it to have a wider effect but cost less mana. Her wider effect that makes your dragons hit double strike, you only have, I think, 4 dragons, Scourge, Artaka, Baleful Dragon, and Terror of the Peaks, right? That is too few dragons for Artaka's text to be very, well, let's say much more than flavor text. Instead, you could just write double strike on her. And so I don't particularly like her here. Similarly, I'm a bit hard on Balefire Dragon because I don't know how effective it is to wipe one person's board. Like, once again, it hits for 12, which isn't bad. But the fact that it wipes only one player's board will mean players will either ignore it or, I don't know. Either you ignore this card because you don't particularly care that it wipes your board, or you destroy it, which the part of the problem with the deck is that it's vulnerable to removal. That's neither here nor there. Or they just, like, do they care is my question. I don't know. At a higher power level, if I have a board clear and you attack me with Balefire Dragon and I lose my board, I go, finally, I can use this board clear. So I don't know if that really bothers me. And I don't know how much it incites your other opponents to realize that in this turn cycle, they have to destroy Balefire or lose their board. I don't know. I'm medium. I will also put this with Itali where I'm like, I don't like it, but I think you should be critical about it and think how much you want it. It's also 7 mana. I think 7 mana is a bit high here. You want to go fast, stick to the 5 mana threats as much as you can. Let's look at Putrefax for a second. I can't believe I hadn't thought about this card. I've been thinking about this deck for a while now, and I did not think of this card. Putrefax just represents another immediate win against an opponent. Now, it's a bit tougher because it gets exactly to 10, and which means that blockers will stop it from happening, and then it dies right after. But that's not as bad because you can pump its power in a number of ways. You can attack players that are tapped out, happens all the time. And you can also find ways like Ewit to put it back in your hand. So I do like Putrefax here. The fact that it comes with a few of its stats that you care about already is really nice, so that you could just use it with Unnatural Growth as its own doubler without Xenagos to just win on the spot against one of your opponents is really nice. So what would I like to put in? So Worldly Tutor, which I didn't type in the rest of accidentally, Worldly Tutor is the tutor that I'm going to ask you to consider. I recognize that you said you don't really like these effects, but I think it would substantially power up the deck. You are an A plus B combo. A is Xenagos, B is your big boys and girls. And Worldly Tutor is like the asterisk for all of your big creatures. It is any copy of all these creatures. Now, though as much as I've been kind of pointing to Malignus and Phyrexian Hydra as your one-shot wins, there is something to say that on different board states you're going to want different cards, right? If you have, for example, a board state where Hydra Omnivore allows you to be lethal against one of your opponents, where you attack opponent C with 16 and you hit opponent A for 16, defeating opponent A, you might want Hydra Omnivore more. If you desperately want Kogla and Yadaro's ability, you tutor for them. They're very, very strong, and it would be a very good tutor target, etc., etc. So I really like Worldly Tutor here. It's not too expensive. It's a strong one. I'm a big fan. I don't know how much. Oh my goodness, no. Fierce Empath, right? Empath. Fierce Empath is one you want here. You're gonna look for a creature card with converted at 6 or greater. I thought it was power that it looked for, but the fact that it will still get you some of your big boys and girls, really, really nice. Big creatures. That's what I'll say. Really, really nice. Why is it 5 mana? That's heartbreaking. Search library creature. Whoops, let's put it into red green as well. I'm sure there's a bunch of tutors that I don't really play the green tutors as much. I'm often in black, so I often don't need to think about these. I don't think we're gonna Eldritch Evolution. I think Fauna Shaman's okay. When you don't have synergy with the graveyard, it's not as great. Hmm. Not a lot of options, I would say. Natural, $15. I think this might be a bit. People find this card to be a bit too strong, where you're just going to tutor and play a creature into play. Let's see. Primal Command is fine. I think that's usually at a level that people find is a fair card. It's 5 mana to do that and has other effects. I don't think we're at the level you want to play Summoner's Pact. Yeah, I would just start with Worldly Tutor, I think. Tooth and Nail is fine as well, but it's a lot of mana. It's pretty expensive too. So I would just suggest starting with Worldly Tutor. Just grab that, use that as an extra copy of any of your big creatures, and use that to win the game. I'm a big fan of that. Another suggestion I'm going to do right away is Rancor. I don't think you would I don't think it would hurt you to have a few more trample enablers. And Rancor is not something you see in Commander a lot, which I think is too bad. It is repeated or recurable, you might say, because when the creature that's enchanted with it dies, you get it back. But the fact that it also gives 2 power works really well with your power doublers and Xenagos, because that turns cards like Phyrexian Hydra and our other infect creature, whose name I've immediately forgotten, Putrefax, it makes it easier for them to be lethal, right? Because one assumes that our opponents will have some blockers, and with Trample, let's look at Hydra, it becomes 14/14. With Trample, your opponent needs to block with 5 or more toughness. With Rancor, it actually becomes an 18/18, and they need to block with 9 toughness. That's a lot harder. So a Rancor-like effect is really, really good. It goes well once again with our fling effects and our other interaction and berserk. So I think it just doesn't hurt to have a Rancor in here. Otherwise, I do really like what's going on here. I think the deck itself is very good. I think if you really wanted, we could have a few more 1 mana green, let's see, hexproof effects. So Blossoming Defense, Hapatra's Mark. You already have Tamiyo Safety. I prefer like Snakeskin Veil, Blossoming Defense, Tyver's Last Stand. Tyver's Last Stand is really, really good here because yeah, let's just straight up just say Tyver's Last Stand, as it makes your creature indestructible and hexproof, and if you have extra mana, it adds power, and that extra mana is doubled because of your commander, because the power is doubled after it. This is a lot of text that I really like. So I wouldn't mind if resilience is a part of the thing you're thinking about, one or two of those cards would also help. Finally, this is just me. I really don't like unnatural growth. Every time I see it, I understand why it looks so powerful, but that mana cost is so restrictive, and I think you're playing enough doublers already. You have doublers out of here in your commander, so I don't really feel you need it as much. In fact, if you're going to have more redundancy, I think I would rather you be playing Crashing Draw Bridge or Concurrent Crossroads, I believe that they're called. Concordant Crossroads. Both of these will give your creatures haste. I think that's also something that's particularly hard for your deck to be able to do, and I wouldn't mind having that as an extra ability here or there. Otherwise, I really like your deck. I think it's very solid. I think adding the Worldly Tutor is a really great start. I think the second one I'd add in, after looking through the green ones, I realized Gamble would have been just as good. Gamble is another card that is very strong. Of course, it is a little more fun, is the word I'll use. It's a little more dicey because you might discard the card you tutor, but it's just another card that'll let you tutor into the correct creature for the board state, as opposed to just grabbing an additional one. After that, the last few things I would think about is the deck wouldn't hurt to play one or two more ramp spells. You are trying to hit a higher number. You're playing Cultivate and Kadama's Reach. Wouldn't hurt to play Farseek or Rampant Growth to grab one or two more. But otherwise, the deck looks really solid. I think it has a very good gameplay, and I agree with your assessment that it's the balance that's a little off. The deck idea is strong. It'll play well at higher power groups, like upwards to mid to high power, and your biggest weakness is that they know what you're doing. When you play Xenagos, you're kind of all in on your combo, right? You want to take your opponents out quickly, and it creates a kind of arms race where your opponents get more and more suspicious of you, and so you need stronger and stronger threats. And so I like things like Phyrexian Hydra and Malignus here because they are the highest threat available while being like castable creatures. Not great castable creatures, but castable creatures nonetheless. And so when you play these kind of cards, they let you try to defeat your opponents. If they're removed, then you can start playing your stronger utility cards, such as where's our Port Razor, or Scourge of the Throne. You know, these multiple attack step creatures that represent they still represent one shot sometimes, but they're trickier to do and they work better as your opponents have less and less removal. You're complicating the board state so that in the late game, your opponents just don't have the resources to take you out completely. With Deflecting Swat and a few 1-mana interaction spells, I think the deck itself is particularly strong to deal with your opponents. I've been meaning to come back to Chandra's Ignition. It's a 5-mana fling style. Yeah, I guess it hits enough opponents. Okay, I have nothing to say. It's perfect here. Yep, I like this deck. I think it's good. Play around with those numbers that I suggested. See how that works. Try one or two tutors. See how you feel about casting them. And see if they help your deck do the thing it wants. Because I really do feel like there's going to be a lot of situations where you're one card off. Where your board state's there, but you need a doubler, or you need that creature to immediately win, or you've kind of run low on card draw and you need to grab greater good so that you can get ahead right away. Though Gamble only grabs that, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that. But with Gamble, you can grab greater good. Yeah. So those are my thoughts on the deck. I hope this was helpful. As always, if you have another draft of the deck or would like me to see any other deck, The form that you can fill out is in the YouTube description below. And whenever you fill it out, it goes on my list and I'll get to it when I can and hopefully see what you've done with the deck. Because I think this is a really strong place to start at a mid to high power. And with adjustments, it can grow a lot stronger. Also, as always, if you want to like, comment, subscribe, the YouTube things, it's very beneficial for the channel. The channel is quite new and is still growing. Thank you so much and good luck with the deck.